What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. It's a unique program in Catholic airwaves, or any airwaves, I guess. It's a program on a Catholic network for non-Catholics. We would like to talk about what is stopping you from either becoming a Catholic or returning to the Catholic faith. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Give us a call. We won't bite, I promise. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. And of course, you can always send us an email, ctc@ewtn.com. ctc@ewtn.com is that address. Charles Beery is our producer, Michael Birchfield is our phone screener, and Jeff Burson is on social media. So if you're watching us today on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can just put your question in the comments box. Jeff will send that down here to us in Radio Studio 1. All right, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very good. I don't think we've had a luncheon update from you. Did you even have lunch today?
I did, actually. I did. Had it here at the network, brought it with me. Ate before we got on the show.
Which consisted of?
Potatoes, zucchini, onions, chickpeas, carrots, a peach, and some green tea.
Ridiculously healthy. Sounds great.
Well, I'm working on it.
Good for you.
I'm making up for lost time of the first 48 years of my life.
You and me both. Here's an email from Michael in Columbus who says, Dr. Anders, you have made it very clear over the course of time that you believe good works is the means of salvation, and that the role of faith and grace is to support that means and our efforts to perform the good works, namely God, loving God and neighbor. So my question today for you is, how is it that you are within orthodoxy and not a semi-Pelagianist? Thanks, Michael in Columbus.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the question. So I would prefer to say that good works are one of the instruments of salvation, right? And it's the basis for Christ's judgment of us at the end of time, and our own particular judgment. When Jesus says, "Well done, good and faithful servant," or that other thing, it'll be on the basis of our works done in charity that he makes that judgment, right? And that's pretty clear from the teaching of sacred Scripture. And I think it's also a reasonable opinion to hold, right? I mean, even if we didn't know it from the Bible, sort of the common moral consensus of mankind is that we reward virtue and we punish vice, right?
Yeah.
But it is the teaching of Scripture. Now, why does that not make me a Pelagian or a semi-Pelagian? Well, the heresy of Semi-Pelagianism taught that we merit the initial grace that God gives us, right? The Semi-Pelagian position was that, you're sort of trucking along in your natural state, you don't have God's grace, then you sort of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and ask God for grace, and then God responds and gives you grace. That's Semi-Pelagianism. Well, I don't believe that, neither does the Catholic Church teach it. And the Catholic Church is the communion that condemned Semi-Pelagianism, right, at Council of Orange. Pelagianism is the belief that God's grace is nothing other than the law of God and the example of Christ and the intellectual illumination of the mind by the Holy Spirit to understand the life of virtue. But when it actually comes to willing and doing the good, one is left to one's own natural resources and human freedom. That was Pelagius' position. Well, that's also not the Catholic Church's position. Again, it was the Catholic Church that condemned Pelagianism. So the reason Pelagianism and Semi-Pelagianism have been identified as heresies is because the Catholic magisterium condemned them as heresies. And I hold nothing but the Catholic faith, or at least I strive to hold nothing but the Catholic faith. If I make a mistake someplace, nice canon lawyers write me letters and tell me so. But on a good day, I'm holding the Catholic faith. And what the Catholic faith teaches is that we cannot merit the initial grace of justification, and we cannot merit the grace of perseverance. That's the Church's position. So if you're mired in sin and lost in your own misery, And all of a sudden, a sort of illuminating awareness of God and the need for God's grace and the desire for forgiveness and a good life comes to you, and you cry out to God for mercy. Well, that impulse in your soul to ask for help is in fact God's grace. That's what we call prevenient grace, grace that comes before your good works, making them possible.
Okay.
All right? Then God rewards his own gifts. So, it's like if I said to my son, well, you have to pay 25 cents for dinner. Here's 25 cents. Then he hands me the 25 cents that I just gave him, and I, give him dinner. I reward him for something that I just gave him, right?
Yeah.
That's what God does with us. He gives us grace, enables our cooperation, and then rewards our cooperation with more grace and more of himself. But to persevere in the faith, to persevere in the state of grace, you cannot merit. That's the teaching of the Catholic Church. You cannot merit the gift of perseverance. So if I am in the state of grace today, if I'm still in the state of grace tomorrow, that is not due to my good effort or moral fiber. That is because God has granted me the gift of persevering one more day. And if I persevere to the end and am saved, that is also due to God's benevolence, not my good works. Now, along the way, as he is giving grace, he does give me the opportunity to cooperate and to merit reward. But that's just God crowning his own gifts. That's the teaching of the Catholic Church. That's what I hold, and that's what the Church teaches.
Michael, thank you so much for your question. Here's a quick one from Anthony. I would like to know why the Sacrament of Confirmation is given when it is given in the Catholic faith, usually around 7th or 8th grade. How come it's not later or when a person considers himself ready? Thanks. Love your show, Anthony.
Okay, thanks. So it's important to recognize that confirmation is one of the sacraments of initiation, along with baptism and the Eucharist. And in fact, an argument can be made that the proper order is baptism, confirmation, Eucharist.
Yeah.
And that's the way they do it in the East, in the Eastern Catholic churches. And in fact, they do it all in one fell swoop. So they take the baby, baptize him, dunk that little sucker, get him nice and wet. And when he's, crying something fierce, they do the Holy Chrism, they anoint him, which is in the West we call confirmation. And then he has his first Holy Communion.
Wow.
Little tiny piece of the host when he's an itty-bitty-bitty guy or gal, as the case may be.
Yes.
Now, as to why this sacrament of initiation got separated in time from the others in the Latin Church, we'll have to do that after the break.
All right. So sit tight, and Anthony, we will continue that question in a moment. We'll also talk with James in Canton, Ohio. Lots more straight ahead on this edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Stay with us.
Prayer is an opportunity to spend quality time with God. So pray from the heart. Let God know you trust Him, believe in Him, and most of all, that you love Him. My favorite prayer that I say many times a day is, Jesus, I trust in you. It is simple, but as we know from St. Faustina, it reaches His heart.
The people who call more to life are often hurting so much. I just want to reach through the radio and hug them. I want them to know how loved they are and how much God wants to fill their hearts with His healing grace and His deep desire to completely transform the life of anyone who's open to the movement of His Holy Spirit.
More to Life with Dr. Greg and Lisa Popchak. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
It's called Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. We are live for you on this Wednesday afternoon here on EWTN Radio. Before the break, we were tackling a question from Anthony, who said, why is the sacrament of confirmation given when it is given in the Catholic faith? It's usually around 7th or 8th grade. How come it's not later or when a person considers himself ready?
Yeah, thanks. So I began by talking about the sacrament of confirmation as one of the sacraments of initiation, along with baptism and the Eucharist. So it's important to recognize that confirmation is a sacrament for the beginning of the Christian life, not for its fulfillment or culmination. So it is emphatically not a sacrament of Christian maturity. It's not a sacrament of graduation. It's not a sacrament for those who feel like they're ready in that sense. It's a sacrament to make you ready, not the reward to the ready or to the mature, but it's a sacrament to mature you. And it deepens the grace of baptism in our life. In particular, our baptismal priesthood, the character of our life, it's oriented towards witness in the world to the work of Christ, our participation in advancing the work of the church and of evangelism. And so sacrament of confirmation is appropriate for people who are living publicly as Christians, that they might bear witness faithfully by their lives to Christ. Now, it is historically in the East, as I mentioned, the 3 sacraments of initiation are given together at baptism to infants. There's always been a tradition in the Church of instruction before giving the sacraments of initiation, and in catechumens in the Church today, that's still very common. If you're an adult catechumen, you're going to have to receive instruction before you get these others. Now, when more and more people were born into the faith, and because of the necessity of baptism was given earlier. In the West, they still delayed the other sacraments because of that connection to the order of instruction. Okay. Now, it was, up until 1910, the case that Latin Catholics would receive the Eucharist and confirmation much later in life, like late adolescence. And Pope Pius X lowered the age of First Communion to around, the age of reason, around 7 years old, but he left confirmation in place. Just so it's a little bit of a historical accident that is separated in time like that. Okay. And look, I'm not advocating, nor am I opposing this practice, but many dioceses in the United States today are seeking to what's called restored order of the sacraments of initiation, where they drop the age of confirmation back down to the age of First Communion for kind of the reasons that we've talked about. Now, that's the bishop's job to decide if that's the right decision for his diocese. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that's the logic behind that. It really gets to the root of your question.
All right, very good. Anthony, thank you so much for that question. We're going to get to the phones in just a moment. We're also going to get to a question from Donald on YouTube. But first, I want to tell you we have something very exciting for you. You can now watch all of the important events coming to you from Rome, even if you don't have TV access. Using the latest technology, we have made it possible to watch the latest news from the Holy See delivered directly to your home via live streams. From Rome to your home, the EWTN Vatican Bureau is bringing you the coverage you won't want to miss. And I can tell you, it's coverage you're not going to find anywhere else. Watch it live on EWTN's YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. From Rome to your home. How about that? If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with James in Canton, Ohio, listening on the great Living Bread Radio. Hello, James. What's on your mind today?
I have a question for Dr. Anders. Great show, by the way. Dr. Anders, this question relates back to your initial interview with Marcus Grodi on the Coming Home show.
Yes.
About back in 2010, I think.
Yep.
You were talking about the Bible and the Christ authority, which he was then passing on to the apostles. And this is a quote from what you said. The reason I'm asking the question, I'm kind of working with a fallen away Catholic who he listened to this, and he kind of went bananas on this one statement, and he's off in left field, and I wasn't sure what it meant. Anyway, the question you said was this, and I'm quoting, that authority that Christ had, comma, to interpret the Scriptures, comma, to change the legislation of Scripture, comma. Now, that's the term I don't get. Change the legislation of Scripture. What exactly does that refer to, or did you mean? So I can explain to this guy who went off in left field. He heard that, and he said, oh, see, the church has the authority to change the Scriptures, or they think they do.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So in Matthew chapter 19, the Pharisees come to Jesus, and they ask if it is lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And Jesus says no. And they say, well, then why does the law of Moses say otherwise? And Christ says that was a concession because of your hardness of heart. But it was not that way from the beginning. God made them male and female, and what said, be fruitful and multiply, and what God has joined together, let man not separate. So Christ relativized the Mosaic law. Clearly. He said the Mosaic legislation, the civil code for family law in ancient Israel, Christ said was clearly a relative thing, and it should not be the guide to the moral life. Well, that's Matthew chapter 19. I mean, I'm not making that up. And when the question of the entire Mosaic code, whether it ought to be applied to the Gentile church, and look, following the law of Moses was precisely what it meant to be a faithful, zealous Jew. This is what St. Paul was murdering people over. Do you impose that on Gentile converts? In the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15, and look, Jesus did not directly address this question. I mean, by implication he did, but he didn't directly address this question. When Gentile converts come to the church that he founded, should they be required to keep the law of Moses in all its fine particulars? He didn't directly address that question, although one can infer his answer. And the Council of Jerusalem met and discussed the problem and ascribed to the Holy Spirit the following interpretive decision. We do not impose this on the Gentiles. They had the authority from God as the magisterium of the church, guided by the Spirit of Christ, to make that interpretive decision in a way that clearly relativized the Mosaic law for the life of Christians. This is scriptural. This is what the Bible bears witness to itself on this issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, does that mean that the magisterium of the church could change Jesus' teaching? No, absolutely not. It's the Spirit of Christ that guides the magisterium of the church, and we're faithful to the deposit of Christ as it came down to us from Jesus and the apostles. That can never change, right? And that's Christ is the final revelation. So the church could not make it lawful, say, to commit murder. That's settled. But the church today, the magisterium today, definitely can interpret what the prohibition of murder means for Christians living today. So, for example, surgical abortion becomes widespread in the 20th century in a way that had never been contemplated in the ancient world. An authoritative moral decision is needed. Does the command, thou shalt not murder, extend to unwanted pregnancies, to the fetus in the womb of a mother who doesn't want her child?
Well, sure.
Well, you need an interpretive decision. Yeah. You need one that's authoritative. Well, the magisterium of the church, guided by the Spirit of Christ, is competent to say, yes, thou shalt not murder also counts for unborn babies. And that's an authoritative decision. Okay.
James, is that helpful for you?
Yes. I'm still just not clear. My problem is, what does the word legislation mean?
Law.
What's that mean exactly?
It means law.
When you say
it means law. Legislation means law. Now, moral theologians distinguish several types of law. We can talk about the natural law. Now, the natural law is the law, and we use the word here analogously, that's written into our very frame. There are certain conditions that conduce to human flourishing, right? Tom made fun of me at the beginning of the show for my super healthy lunch, right? And it is a fact of my biology that if I live on Twinkies and beer, I will not flourish. All right?
No.
The magisterium of the church could blow smoke all day long, and it's not going to change the fact that Twinkies and beer are not going to make me healthy. All right? In the same way, there are mandates, norms of the moral life that flow from our nature as human beings. And you can't change those because our nature is a determinate form given to us by God. One of those things, for example, would be the fact that we're created male and female. The human species is sexually dimorphic, and we're fitted and ordered for one another in procreative union to bear children. And I cannot by fiat make that not the case. I could jump up and down all day long and say, I am a jelly donut.
Yeah.
And it's not going to make me something other than a man.
So that is not a law like you would pass in Congress.
Right. That's what we call, that's a part of the natural law.
Okay.
You can't change the natural law. The eternal law is the natural law known to the mind of God from all eternity. You can't change that. Now, a positive law is a man-made law, like the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. That's a positive law. Well, Congress can make it 56, and that's not unjust.
Okay.
Right? And that can change.
Hope that helps you, James. Thank you so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to Communion in Progress on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon here on EWTN Radio. Donald is watching us on YouTube right now. Hey, Donald. Donald says, as a non-Catholic, I have been looking into conversion, but I'm having a tough time accepting papal infallibility. Your thoughts, please, on working through this spiritual struggle.
Yeah, sure. Appreciate the question. I always find it helpful to draw distinctions when I have to make a decision like this and figure out what I'm not obligated to. All right? And that's what the First Vatican Council did when they defined the dogma of papal infallibility. They wrote it very narrowly, very narrowly and very precisely, and they specified what they did not mean. So if you get clear on what it does not mean, it really helps to make the act of faith. So let me give you a great example, fantastic example that will illustrate what papal infallibility does not mean. Cardinal Newman, who is a saint, he was canonized by Pope Francis and beatified by Pope Benedict. He was really Benedict's favorite theologian. He is widely reputed to be the greatest theologian of the 19th century, at least clearly the greatest English language theologian of the 19th century, and a canonized saint of the Catholic Church, and maybe one day he'll even be named a doctor of the Church. I wouldn't be surprised. Newman believed in the dogma of papal infallibility. He thought it was divinely revealed. He thought that it should not be defined by the First Vatican Council. He was called an inopportunist. He thought that the council was being held at an inopportune time, and it was not a good idea to define the dogma at that time. He believed the dogma. He thought it was true. He just thought that to define it would be a bad idea at that time. Now, I'm not interested in saying that Newman was right or wrong in that opinion. He may have been right, he may have been wrong. I tend to think he was wrong, okay? It doesn't matter. But the fact is that he could believe that the Pope could be imprudent, that it could be a bad decision to correctly define a dogma of the faith. Now, to me, that is highly illustrative of the nuance involved in the teaching, that the Pope's prudential decisions, even about the decision about when and how to define a dogma, those prudential acts are not infallible.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the dogma itself is infallible, but his prudential acts in his conduct of his ordinary magisterium, of teaching the faith, of protecting the church from error, of appointing bishops, of legislation, of rule and governance, of preaching the gospel, in all of those things, he's not infallible.
Right.
And it's and in his personal moral life, he could be like way not infallible.
Yeah.
And we've had some popes that were real scoundrels.
Indeed.
All infallibility means is when the Pope declares that some article of faith handed down from 2,000 years by divine revelation is to be held definitively by all the Christian faithful, that when he does that, he's not wrong. He's not in error. He might be imprudent.
Yeah.
But he's not factually wrong.
All right.
That's all you have to assent to. Now, why would you assent to this? A, because Christ promised it. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church built on the rock of St. Peter, who has the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And secondly, because the popes, for all of their personal moral failings and their imprudent decisions, have in fact fulfilled their job description, which is to protect the doctrine of the faith, to protect the deposit of faith down through the centuries. They have in fact done that. They've done a lot of other things too, some good, some bad. But in their primary job description, they've satisfied the job description. And so it's reasonable to make an act of faith in papal infallibility. It's taught by Christ, and it can be reasonably understood and reasonably defended from history.
Okay. There we go. And that is from Donald. Donald, thank you so much for watching us on YouTube. A quick one here from Deborah, watching also on YouTube. I recently, Deborah is a non-Catholic, by the way. I went to visit St. Patrick's I guess in New York, near my daughter's home. Can we just show up at a Mass? And is there a place where we should sit so that it's not obvious we are not Catholic?
You can show up at a Mass, and you can sit wherever you please. The only thing you can't do is you cannot receive Holy Communion if you're not Catholic. But you can, please come. We want you to come. Come, sit wherever you want, go wherever you want. Avail yourself of the riches of the church.
And it's a beautiful cathedral.
Oh, boy, is it.
It really, really is. And thousands of people visit there, I think, well, maybe not during a pandemic year, but certainly any other year. I've been to St. Patrick's Cathedral several times and was always edified.
I sang in my high school glee club. We sang for a Mass at St. Patrick's when I was not Catholic.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was something else. It's the first time I'd ever heard anyone chant the gospel. And I thought, man, these Catholics are weird.
Little did you know.
Little did I know.
There you go, Donna. Thank you so much for watching us on YouTube. Hey, phone lines are wide open. If you have a question or a comment for Dr. David Anders, including our little motto here, what would it take or what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Call us now at 833-288-EWTN.
From Rome, this is Edward Pentin, correspondent for the National Catholic Register.
This is Tracy Sable from EWTN News Nightly.
I'm Jonah McKeown for the Catholic News Agency.
Get trusted Catholic news every day on EWTN television and radio.
Father Benedict Groeschel.
Some great people have shown respect for God. Can I read you a little quotation from Albert Einstein, who many times showed a great respect for religion and was one of the great admirers of Pope Pius XII for his stand against the Holocaust during the Second World War. Einstein wrote, "The fairest thing we can experience is the mysterious. It's the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of all true art and science. A knowledge of the existence of something we can't penetrate, of the manifestations of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty which are only accessible to our minds in their most elementary form. It is this knowledge and this emotion that constitute the truly religious attitude." Oh my, so beautifully said.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Now there's a fast and easy way to get in touch with EWTN. The EWTN Everything number. Call 1-800-447-EWTN to get the latest information on programming, special events, pilgrimages, and more. Our EWTN Family Viewer Services representatives are ready to help you with whatever your needs may be. The EWTN Everything number. 1-800-447-EWTN. EWTN.
Let us know what you'd like to talk about. That's tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on our monthly unscripted show on most of these EWTN stations. Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Let's talk about it here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. A question here from Kent now, who says, what happens when a person in good faith receives communion not knowing he is in mortal sin, but actually he is? Is there some theology on that? The Christian Brothers, back in the 1940s, that's an order, told my dad and his class that the sin is remitted and the grace is restored. Well, that seems to fit with Padre Pio's advice that one should not obtain from communion, or one should not obtain from communion unless one is absolutely sure one is in mortal sin. Interesting. According to church dogma, one cannot know for sure if one is in the state of grace. Thanks for your informative program, Kent.
Yeah,
I think there's some typos in here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate the question. So, first of all, we can never know with certainty that we're in the state of grace. We can have a conjectural certainty that we're in the state of grace, but we can't have an absolute certainty that we're in the state of grace. We can be absolutely certain of having been absolved, right? And so not only is it the law, but it's also the safe option that when in doubt, go to confession.
Sure.
When not in doubt, go to confession. Just go to confession. Make a habit of it, right? The church also teaches that that the efficacy, not the validity, but the efficacy of our communion depends on the charity in our soul. All right, so you can have a valid communion, and it could range in efficacy from sacrilegious, in which case it could damn us, all the way to, super high octane powerful, depending on the disposition of our soul. And so it's always, the more charity we have towards God and neighbor, the more effective communion will be in us. The Church also teaches that communion can remit sin. Now, I'll have to do a little bit more research on this, but the opinion that it would remit mortal sin to the soul that is invincibly ignorant, I'll have to ponder that one. I would say that would be dangerous pastoral counsel, right? Right, unless one highly nuanced it. First of all, never bet on invincible ignorance.
Dangerous.
As soon as you've done that, you're not invincible anymore.
That's right.
Right. As soon as you're betting on invincible ignorance, all of a sudden now you're vincible. Now you are culpably ignorant because you could have found out otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And a soul that is not in the state of grace, by definition, does not have charity. By definition, does not have charity.
Sure.
And so, that's not why Holy Communion is given. Holy Communion is not given for the restoration of the soul in mortal sin to charity. That's what baptism and reconciliation are for. Now, for the remission of venial sins, yes, to be sure. But the tradition of the Church on this has never been to advise people in mortal sin, to advance the cause of invincible ignorance so they can receive communion safely. That's just not the practice or teaching of the Church. St. Augustine, in his sermon to the catechumens, way back in the 4th century, says, he plays this teaching out. And this is back when the Church used to have an order of penitents that sat at the back of the Church. And he admonishes the catechumens who are about to receive into the Church. And he says, look, for the remission of your venial sins, saying the Our Father and receiving the sacraments is sufficient. But should you happen to fall into mortal sin, see those guys at the back of the church? You're going back to the back, like those guys. So don't do that.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I did figure out what the typo is, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
The typo, here's how it should read. The sentence was, that seems to fit with Padre Pio's advice that one should not abstain from communion unless one is absolutely sure one is in mortal sin.
Yeah.
Abstain.
So I understand that's the opinion of Padre Pio, and that is probably very good advice for scrupulous souls,
okay.
Right? That's probably not good advice for presumptuous souls.
Got it. Okay. It's called a communion here on EWTN. A couple of lines are available for you right now, 3 to be exact, at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you call now and we get your call screened, you've got a really super good chance of getting on today's live program. Here is Joe now, Julian. Let's go to Julian in Morgantown, West Virginia, and he is a first-time caller. Julian, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I was calling about when I first got into my car, and I heard that you were talking about the legislation and whatnot. And I'm guessing around, some of the new things that are coming up with gender and everything. And you said something about how sort of the primacy, the law of first and stuff, and how God made them male and female. And I've been struggling with that myself, and because I kind of came up with a science background. I studied neurology, but I'm a very faith-based person. I'm a Protestant. But I've been struggling with this because I know that in nature there are more things that happen. There are hermaphrodites that are born, people born a certain way. I don't know that it's fair to categorize them one way or the other. And there's also animals throughout the entire animal kingdom that start with one gender, and then sometimes, in frogs or different lizards, different kinds of animals that can switch gender because their species is at risk because they have a lot of one gender and not enough of the other. So, I don't mean to belittle that or what the teaching is, and I understand, and I've been through this a few times, that sometimes what happens is we say in human beings and in our species, the reason that some, hermaphroditism or homosexuality or these different kinds of things exist is because of sin. And I have a really hard time with that because of the biological nature, and I just wondered what you felt about that.
Yeah.
And,
You've raised a lot of different questions. They're all related, but we have to kind of tease them apart and do some analysis here. So first of all, the reason that we can recognize a biological species or a norm and an outlier, the reason we can recognize outliers in any sort of statistical sample is we know what the norm is. Like we know what the standard is against which we're going to identify the outlier. So if I come up with some sort of hybrid type, a liger, a mule, the reason I know I can identify that as not a distinct species is I know what tigers and lions are, I know what donkeys and horses are, right? If I come up with if the reason I know that a two-headed turtle is a kind of statistical outlier is I know what the normal form of turtles are. I know what the sort of natural form of a turtle will be if everything lines up, in the normal way, and it's not going to be a two-headed turtle. It may be a bad example, but you get the point that I'm trying to make. And whenever you have a sort of deviation from a biological type, and the type is adapted for some kind of survivability or flourishing, would the church regard that itself as somehow a moral evil? And the answer to the question is absolutely not. We would see it as a kind of it'd be a form of suffering, really. Generally speaking, these kinds of deviations don't tend to the flourishing of the individual unit, right, to the animal or the person that suffers them, and so we would extend compassion to them, profound compassion, right? And so that's part of the answer to your question. Now, also when it comes to the questions you raised about other species, well, other species are not moral agents, right? So if you have some sort of asexual reproduction in, I don't know how sea squirts reproduce. Maybe they're sexual reproduction. Maybe they're asexual. I don't know. Well, let's, for the sake of argument, say that sea squirts are asexual reproducers. Well, sea squirts don't get married, and they wouldn't need to get married. And it wouldn't be immoral or moral if they did or didn't, because sea squirts are not moral agents. And so morality only pertains to rational agents that have some form of rational self-determination. Mm-hmm. So, I'm not held to, say, a chimpanzee morality, or to sea squirt morality, or to, beluga whale morality. Mm-hmm. But there is no such thing. Morality only pertains to rational agents, which, as far as we know, are humans and angels. Those are the only agents that can be moral or immoral. Now, maybe one day we'll find some species on another planet that's a rational agent, and then we can talk about their morality. But right now, all we know are humans and angels are the only rational species for whom morality makes any sense. And the other aspect of the human person is, while we are definitely material and biological creatures, we are not only biological creatures, and we don't want to fall into the era of what's called biologism, right? Which is that human flourishing is something that can be, biology is implicated, to be sure, mm-hmm, but that can be determined simply as a matter of biology or physiology or genetics, right? Because there's more to the human person than our materiality. Because we are rational agents, it is of the essence of the human person as much to be rational as it is to be biological or to be sexually dimorphic. And so the reason we're moral agents is precisely because we can reason about these things, and we can make rational, informed choices between those things that tend to human flourishing and those things that tend to deviate from human flourishing. And again, we have a concept, a determinate concept of human flourishing, because we have a rational idea of the form of the human person that we derive not from an aggregate of outliers, but from the form.
Yes, indeed. Julian, thank you so much for your call. I hope that clarifies things for you. It is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Two lines open at the moment at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. I'm Tom Price, reminding you to join us for Holy Sacrifice of the Mass from Our Lady of the Angels Chapel. That's tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern and every day at 8 a.m. Eastern right here on EWTN Radio and Television. Let's go to Joe on Long Island right now, listening on EWTN Live. And here we go. Joe, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot for taking the call. I appreciate it. Question concerns a relative of mine who believes in reincarnation and also communication with spirits. I happened to tune in, while thinking about this a little bit, I happened to tune into EWTN, heard Thomas, I think it was Reverend Thomas Dubé, talking about St. Teresa of Avila. Now, I think this might be the best way to reach my relative by suggesting to her, recommending to her, or giving to her something by St. Teresa of Avila. I don't know if there's a connection here or not, but since I don't believe in coincidences too much, that's why I'm calling and asking if you have any suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. So, should you give your relative books by Teresa of Avila? Well, I don't know your relative, but I'll give you some thoughts about that. Teresa of Avila was not formally trained as a theologian, and she does not use the language, the formal or technical language of theology. And in fact, Teresa of Avila is something of a messy writer. She would write, then she would put her book down for months, and she would come back to it, and she would pick it up and say, well, I don't remember where I left off, and then she would go again. And sometimes she'll say, well, we're now going to talk about the virtue of humility. And then she would immediately launch into a discussion of some other virtue, right? So she can be somewhat frustrating to read. However, she is widely regarded as one of the great mystics of the tradition and a profound doctor of the interior life, of the spiritual life. Many, many people who are interested in reincarnation are interested not so much because of reincarnation, but maybe they're drawn to the whole sort of mystique of the East and to what they think of as a kind of mysticism or esotericism in religion, and that's very attractive to them. Mm-hmm. Those types of people usually eat up Teresa of Avila with spoons. I mean, they get into her, right? And they unfortunately they often try to adapt her to their esotericism. They try to bend Teresa's words to fit their own agenda. But she has often been a point of contact, and not just Teresa, but the whole Catholic spiritual and mystical tradition is often a point of contact for people who are like that. And they find, I now learned that Catholics also have spirituality. And they may have a very surface knowledge of Catholicism, and they just think of a bunch of rules and buildings and people with funny hats. And then they dig into something like Teresa of Avila, and they recognize, there's a lot more to this business than I understood. And then that opens the door for them. While I would only go with him part of the way, Thomas Merton is someone who read a lot of Teresa and John and Catholic mystical writers, and that drew him into the church, and he sort of went out the other side at the end. But the early Thomas Merton is often a point of contact for many people coming from that sort of mindset to be introduced to Catholicism. The Seven-Story Mountain of Thomas Merton's helped an awful lot of people into the church. I was one of them, right? So that's one thought. Now, if it comes specifically to attacking the doctrine of reincarnation, Teresa will be of no help to you, because that's just she just doesn't deal with that. She doesn't address it, okay? One place in the tradition that does speak explicitly about that is St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Contra Gentiles, his Summa against the Gentiles, in the first section when he talks about the doctrine of the human soul. I would not give that to your relative. It'd be impenetrable to her, but it's a place for you to go for research. And let me boil it down for you. Reincarnation is an irrational belief. First of all, because we know enough about the human person, not only from philosophy, but even from science and biology, to recognize that philosophical dualism, the idea that we are somehow disembodied souls, stuck in a skin suit, that's just not how consciousness or neurology work, right? We are our bodies. And that's the Catholic position. I am my body.
Mm-hmm.
I am not me stuck in a body. And the reincarnation position takes that the person or the individual or the Atman or whatever you want to call it or the jiva passes from body to body, but the real locus of identity is this ephemeral, ethereal something that is clearly non-material or some sort of very fine-grained material that's of a different sort. And that kind of dualistic view of soul and body is just not scientifically or rationally tenable, right? And tends to lead to the dismissal and disrespect of the body.
Okay. Joe, thanks so much for listening to us there on Long Island via online, EWTN.com. Very glad to have you along today. Let's go to Steve now. Steve is in Ludington, Michigan, listening on WLCV, a first-time caller. Hey there, Steve. What's on your mind today?
I have a question that I've been struggling with for a while. I'm feeling drawn to become Catholic. My wife and I are both longtime Protestants. She is not feeling drawn to become Catholic. And if I pursue this at this point in time, it's something I would have to do on my own. I've started attending Mass. I've talked to the man who was a friend of mine at our local Catholic church who is part of the faith formation team, and a couple other people, and I'm kind of stuck at the idea of moving ahead with changing churches without my wife moving ahead with me.
Yeah, you are not alone, my friend. You are not alone. Been there and done that. Okay, I have been exactly in your shoes, as have many, 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 many people. So here is my counsel to you. First and foremost, you are no good to your wife at all if you live in violation of your own conscience. You are no good to your wife at all if you live in violation of your own conscience.
That's true. You'll be miserable.
So you'll be miserable and you'll just be morally inert, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you are persuaded in conscience that you must become Catholic, then you are persuaded in conscience that you must become Catholic. And Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, said it as good as anybody could say it. To act against conscience is neither right nor safe. And so you are compelled by your own conscience to become Catholic, and you should listen to your conscience.
The question answers itself, doesn't it?
Sure. However, your conscience does not dictate the when, where, how. And the way in which you become Catholic, the timing of your becoming Catholic, the language you use around becoming Catholic, the sensitivity to your wife as you become Catholic, those are all things that you can approach with deep charity and compassion and sympathy for your wife, recognizing that this may be difficult for her. And so, you do not have to become... There's some people who think when they become Catholic that they need to buy a copy of the Catechism and Carl Keating and go beat their spouse over the head with holy books, right? You do not have to do that. And you can proceed gently, and you can go slowly, and you can be sensitive. And my counsel would be that when you have the conversation, that you lead with the question of conscience. And you can say, I love you above all things, but I love God and my conscience more. And you would not have it any other way. And I wish to honor you in every possible way and to be a better, not a worse husband, and to take your feelings absolutely into consideration. But unless I become Catholic, I will be living at odds with my own conscience, and I will be no good to you as a husband. How can I do this in a way that would be the least painful to you and show you the greatest respect and sensitivity?
Hope that's helpful for you, Steve. Yeah, there's no shot clock ticking.
Right.
So,
right. Well, there is one, but it's the actuaries calculate that one.
It's a long clock. All right. Steve, thanks so much for your call. Let's go to Bob now in Houston, listening on the Great Guadalupe Radio, a first-time caller. Bob, what's on your mind today?
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate your program and the information that you put out there. I'm a former Catholic. I went to grade school, and I went to Catholic church until I was about 28. And then I got so disappointed in the Catholic Church because they, of several reasons, but the biggest one was they were not fighting the American sexual revolution that I with the intensity and the desire to win that I thought they should be. And there was no help otherwise because it was extremely destructive to I believe, to the individuals in our society. And yet the Catholic Church, like all other Christian churches, sat on the sidelines. You know, they might say, well, yeah, you shouldn't do that stuff. Yeah, and the Catholic Church was right, but they didn't really fight it. They didn't get out there. They didn't have a battle plan to whip this thing. You know, in 1956...
All right, how can I help you? Because we only got 2 minutes left. How can I help you?
All right. Why didn't the Catholic Church fight the American sexual revolution like they were fighting a war?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So, you know, the Church has confronted this same problem many times in history, and, of course, they confronted it in pagan Rome. And the way they confronted it, primarily, was that a bunch of lay people, and not necessarily bishops or priests, a bunch of lay people went out into the Egyptian deserts and founded monasticism. And they demonstrated to the world the life of chastity, heroic chastity and asceticism. And that has been a pretty darn effective witness for 2,000 years. And so during the sexual revolution, there were plenty of Catholics who took vows of perpetual continence, chastity, poverty, and obedience, and entered. There were some who left religious life, but there were many who entered religious life and witnessed by the power of their lives the profound gift of chastity. And because they wanted to save their own souls, and they wanted to be icons of Christian discipleship for the rest of the Church. And the Church is not primarily a PAC, you know, or a political action committee or a policy engine that has the, you know, the mandate to to change popular culture using, in spite of EWTN, using mass media or these kinds of tools, but by the witness of lives. And in my experience, my own personal experience, I've known a lot of bad Catholics. I've known a lot of bad Presbyterians. I've known a lot of bad atheists. It doesn't take but one good Catholic. It doesn't take but one good Catholic who lives those vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience heroically to impact thousands. And in my own life, I mean, I'm still living through the sexual revolution. It never stopped. It's just descended to greater and greater depths as we go along. We're just rolling along, right?
Yep.
I have had a few Catholic religious in my life who have made a tremendous difference in my own vocation to chastity as a married person. And their witness speaks volumes to me more than any pontificating bishop with a soapbox could ever do. And I grew up with guys on soapboxes that railed against the spirit of the age. Lo and behold, now that I'm 50 years old, many of those same guys, their lives have now shown up on in media to have been morally bankrupt.
Yeah.
So many of the heroes that I knew growing up who were the champions of the religious right, and man, they were pushing against the culture of, you know, corruption and death and all the rest of it. Now we know. They were morally bankrupt. They were beating their wives. They were cheating on their wives. They were doing all kinds of nonsense behind the scenes. I'll take one holy Catholic religious over 1,000 of those guys any day of the week.
Bob, thanks so much for your call. We do appreciate hearing from you. Could not get to Basil, who had a really good question via, I believe it was either YouTube or Facebook. Basil, we're going to hold that over until tomorrow's show. Hey, Dr. David Anders, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Don't forget, we do the program Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of Dr. David Anders, I'm Tom Price. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow right here. God bless.
Hi, I'm Doug Keck, inviting you to join me next time when our special guest